So today's episode is going to be pretty brief. I was on the fence whether I was going to actually shoot this video or not, but I decided to go ahead and document the process of making the stop block for my miter station. What's a stop block? I'm so glad you asked. A stop block is critical for doing repeat cuts accurately. Let's say I need to cut something down for table legs. Of course, I want 4 table legs that are all exactly the same length. So, first, I secure the stop block at the right measurement away from the blade. I place my workpiece up against the stop block, make my cut with the saw, and then do it again. I can make as many as I want, and they're all going to be identical. And yes, it's true, I'm wearing the same thing in the shop again. So without any extra and unnecessary fanfare, we'll get right into today's project. I figure a good place to work is here at the far end of one of the extension tables for the miter bench. Now the idea with the stop block is we'll want something that can run back and forth in this T-track that's built into the back edge of the extension table. I've got a blank here that we'll start with. Of course, it's way oversized for what we need to do, but we'll cut it down when the time comes. If we were closer to the miter saw itself, you would see that the fence at the back of the miter saw itself starts about right here. So even though my stop block needs to ride in the miter slot back here, it does need to extend forward a ways so that it sticks out past where that fence is. We'll get back to this blank in just a moment. First, I want to talk about the predecessors to this stop block to be. I've got a couple of examples of something from my previous setup. My old extension table had some good old T-track, just like this, that was inlaid in the surface of the extension bench. And well, here's one example of the stop block that I had. The bolt just runs in the T-track, and you can see there's a raised area at the bottom of the stop block so that the stop block doesn't twist. It stays square with everything. Now you can see that you'd move it to where you needed it to be, tighten it down so it stays put. You lay your workpiece up against it and make your cuts. Now, I chose, for some odd reason, that raised area. This was once a thicker piece of material that apparently I used the router to take a bunch of material away except for the raised area. And you can see I did a fairly cheesy job of it at that. It's functional, but I think we're going to take it in a little bit different direction. So here's another example of a predecessor. Let's talk about this one. You can see I had a plexiglass viewfinder here, and the measuring tape actually ran underneath the viewfinder so that I could read my measurement through the window. That was a nice feature. I liked the way that worked, and I think there's elements of this that I want to carry over into the new stop block for this setup. You can see on the bottom where there should be a raised rib here that rides in the T-track to keep the whole works from swiveling. You can see that all that's left is glue marks. Apparently I had an additional piece of material just glued on top of here, and as is obvious, that didn't last long. So I think we want to improve on that as well. So the other thing I like about this new and improved and evolved miter saw table is that as opposed to using good old T-track like this and inlaying it into the surface of the table, I've got this separate extrusion that's part of the framing that sits apart from the actual work table. I like the idea of the T-track laying flat in the miter top as opposed to an auxiliary fence that extends the fence from the miter saw. That helps to make this a multi-purpose work surface, and I don't have this thing in the way that allows me to use it for whatever I need this real estate for at any given moment. So we'll put the history lesson and lessons learned aside and get back to this blank. So let's begin by making a couple of reference marks for where those T-slots fall in that extrusion. And I am going to go ahead and mark both of them. While I really only truly need a single runner in the bottom of this thing to keep the stop block from swiveling, I think I'm going to go ahead and put one in both of those slots. It's probably overkill, but it just seems like the right thing to do. So now that I've got a couple of pencil marks there, let's just extend those marks so that I can see them more clearly when I take this guy over to the table saw and dado out just a little bit of material here. So the idea is, again, improving on the predecessors. All right, so I did the boring stuff off camera over at the table saw. I not only added the dados based on the marks that I'd made earlier, but I sized down the width of our blank, and then I also just doubled up on the thickness, used the extra piece, extra cutoff to double up on the thickness. I want something fairly beefy here to be able to grab onto and move up and down the trolley. So our stop block, when it's done, will sit right about here and ride in those slots. But to keep them square with the world, I also cut these extra pieces that will sit in the dados that we just made. So let's grab the glue, get those in place, and we'll proceed from there. All right, so what we've achieved at this point is a go block. It knows how to go, but it does not yet know how to stop. So that is the next thing we need to tackle. Now that means drilling a hole up to the middle of this for the bolt. The head of said bolt is what rides in our T-track here. So I'm going to be doing this in 2 steps. You'll notice I have a Forstner bit in the chuck here to get this party started. The first thing I want to do is just remove a little bit of additional material out of the middle here so that the head of the bolt has some room to move. And then we'll switch to a bit that is right-sized for the shaft of the bolt itself and go ahead and plunge all the way through the rest of the block. I am a tiny bit concerned about tear out here, but this is hardwood, so I don't think we'll have a problem. Excellent. So I'm using a brad point bit here for wood, and the nice thing about the Forstner bit is the brad point from it gave me a nice, perfect target to match up the center with. Let's take a moment to admire our progress here. So we're going to add the bolt to the bottom, and we're going to reuse a washer from its predecessor, and we're going to reuse that same knob too. That'll be nice to have a familiar feel from my old setup. And then we'll drop this guy in the T-track here at the far end of the bench. Be right back. All right, and so you'll notice that almost as if there was a plan, this does indeed stick out past where the fence on the deck of the saw is. And as designed, you can snug down the knob and it doesn't go anywhere, which is exactly what we want. Now, I think the next thing I'd like to do is, just to make this a little friendlier to hold on to and move around, I'd like to take it over to the router table and do just a little bit of round over work. Now, these bottom edges where the stop block meets the table and where my stock is meeting the stop block, I want nice crisp lines that I can see there. Don't want anything casting any shadows, so I'm not going to be rounding over anything down there. I think it's mainly just around the top that I'd like to take care of. Let's do that next, and then there's just a couple more details. So we're back at the extension table. I think we're pretty much done with the cosmetics. You watched me do the round over work, but I also did a little bit of additional sanding. That included rounding over the runners just to add a little bit of extra insurance that they're not going to catch on anything and that the runners run smoothly. So at this point, our project is almost done. There's roughly 2 steps to go. One of those steps involves adding a sticky back measuring tape that will run right in this recess here in the aluminum extrusion. But before we do that, there is one additional feature I want to add to the stop block itself. You might recall me reminiscing about this predecessor, and one of the features that I liked is that I could read the measuring tape through this plexiglass window, specifically reading it right at the edge of the window. And this is a variation on this, something that I want to incorporate into this stop block. So what that'll look like is just a small strip of plexiglass that'll be recessed on the underneath of the stop block and stick out just a little bit to the side of the stop block. And I'll actually be reading the measuring tape off the edge of that piece of plexiglass that sticks out. That strip of plexiglass, though, will also be adjustable so that I can fine-tune the positioning of the stop block to increase the precision of the measurement. Now, this is a feature I had intended to add all along, but I remembered that I wanted to do that right after I glued and clamped these runners in place. So I get to try and do that now that these are in my way, which is going to be a little bit tricky to say the least. Now, believe it or not, I'm actually going to do this dado on my table saw. I've been really pleased with the precision that I've been getting out of my new table saw. What I need in terms of the blade height is enough to clear the runners plus the thickness of my plexiglass. That should be a perfect blade height to set. So we'll loosen this guy up again, bring that into the picture, and let's see where that gets me. All right, so that should cut to the chase in terms of setting the blade height. And off we go. And that brings us to the final step in the project, which is the installation of the adhesive back ruler here on the extension table for the miter bench. Now, this is actually the step that I've been most apprehensive about because this is the step that requires the most precision. Now, the first thing I'll do is get an accurate measurement off of this tape measure. This is the flat-backed tape measure. Fast Cap makes these. I really like them for woodworking, of course, because they lay flat as opposed to the curved kind that's more typically used in construction and whatnot. So let's get that right up to the miter saw blade and lock it down. Just going to push that over just so it kisses the blade. Square this guy up a little bit. All right, so I'm going to make a mark at, just because it's right in front of me here, I'm going to make a mark at 40 inches. It's kind of a random spot, really. Just marking right on the table. And then that's done its job. So we're going to extend that line back to the aluminum. And let's get a preliminary placement on the adhesive back measuring tape. And to start with, I'm just going to line it up to 40 inches again. That puts it. So that puts me right at 40 inches on the money, but you'll recall this precision adjustment that I added with the little sliding piece of plexiglass here that's part of our stop block. I'm actually going to be reading the tape measure off of where that piece of plexiglass ends. That's my viewfinder window for what the measurement actually is. So that means that I want to take my measuring tape and fudge it that direction by just a little bit, even if it's just 1/8 of an inch, because we'll actually read the measuring tape off of that. All right, so that's where I want the sticky back measuring tape to sit. Now, one of my concerns with this last bit of assembly is that I'll get the measuring tape on crooked, and in the process of pulling it back up, I'll bend and kind of destroy this measuring tape, because it is actually made of metal. Once it creases, it's really difficult to want to use it. So my idea is, we'll see if it works, I'm just going to lay down some masking tape on half of this to help hold it square with the world, and then I'll just remove the adhesive back stuff for the forward half of it. And once that's laid down, then I can remove the rest of the adhesive back and then pull off the latter part. We'll see if this technique actually works. I'm hoping it does. So the left-right position of my tape is holding true with where I want it. It's still fudged that direction just a little bit. So what I'm hoping I can do I just scored the adhesive backing just a little bit. Ooh, say a prayer that we stay square with the world, everybody. Make sure we don't have any bubbles in there. We've got the edges pressed down really well. Don't want any dust getting in under there. Now, I did really clean the aluminum really thoroughly, including alcohol. Grab the tin snips here. We'll snip off the excess that we don't need. All right, so far so good. Again, I was really anxious about this part, but so far, everything is going according to plan. I'll tell you what, on this distal end, I noticed that the adhesive stops just a little bit before the end of the metal. And I want there to be adhesive all the way to the tip. So I'm just going to snip off that part that's not going to stick down. Again, just to, I'm trying to keep dust out of there and keep this thing from peeling up before it's time. Wait. Okay. All right, so far so good. So based on my final decision of how far I've fudged the tape measure that way, I'm going to approximate that adjustment here on the stop block itself, which is a little bit deeper than where it's currently set. Loosen that guy. I'm gonna say that's gonna be pretty close. All right, I'm excited. Let's dial this baby in. All right, so let's set the stop block at 16 inches. And a piece of scrap here. Let's see what we get. We'll check that against our flat back here. Oh, yeah, baby. That's pretty well right on the money, I'd say. And even if it wasn't, I could obsess over it later and dial it in a little tighter. Well, all I can say is precision is a beautiful thing. I think just like every other aspect of this new miter station is one heck of an upgrade from its predecessor, I think the stop block system is right on par with that. As always, I enjoyed spending time with you all, and I'll hope you'll join me again next time on He Said, She Said.